Stop being dramatic, Mom said as I clutched my chest and collapsed to the floor. My cousin laughed, anything to get out of dishes, but when the paramedic arrived and saw my heart rate, his face turned white, and suddenly everyone was screaming. This is one of those real stories, a Reddit family drama story that feels like it belongs on Ask Reddit. My name's Ryan. I'm 27, and if you told me a few years ago that my own family would one day laugh while I was literally collapsing on the floor, I would have called you crazy. But that's exactly what happened, and honestly, it didn't surprise me as much as it should have. That says a lot about how my family treats me. This is my family drama, one of those full Reddit stories you hear about in Reddit reading compilations. But that's exactly what happened, and honestly, it didn't surprise me as much as it should have. That says a lot about how my family, a classic case of entitled people, treats me. Growing up, I was always the soft one. At least, that's what my mom and relatives liked to call me. My cousin Derek got football trophies. My sister Emily was the straight-A perfectionist. And me? I liked drawing, playing piano, and keeping to myself. I wasn't weak. I just didn't fit their version of normal. But in my house, not fitting in meant being the family punchline. Ryan's allergic to hard work, Mom would joke at dinner. Ryan's too delicate for the real world, Derek would chime in. The comments were constant. And when you hear things like that enough times, you start to wonder if they might be right. By the time I was in my 20s, I learned to stop fighting back. Every family gathering, I'd sit quietly, offer to help with dishes or clean up, and keep my head down. I figured keeping peace was better than starting arguments that no one cared to listen to anyway. But the resentment built in small ways. Those little smirks when I dropped something, the eye rolls when I excused myself early because of a migraine. The way Mom always dismissed anything I was proud of as just a hobby. I told myself I didn't need their approval. Still, a part of me always hoped for even a sliver of respect. Spoiler, it never came. The day it all spiraled started off like any other family get-together. It was one of those big Sunday dinners my mom loved to host, with roast chicken, casseroles, and way too many side dishes. Relatives packed the dining room, voices overlapping, plates clattering. I came straight from a long work week. I'd been picking up extra shifts, trying to save enough to move into a better apartment. And honestly, I wasn't feeling well. My chest had been tight all morning, and my energy was drained. But when you grow up in a family like mine, you don't admit that. If I so much as yawned, Derek would make some crack about me being fragile. So I just pushed through, smiling, serving myself mashed potatoes, and nodding at stories I wasn't really listening to. Dinner wrapped up. And as always, the dreaded cleanup began. My mom stood, clapping her hands like a drill sergeant. All right, everyone, let's get this kitchen spotless. Derek slouched back in his chair, patting his stomach. Not it, he muttered, already pulling out his phone. Emily claimed she had important work emails, even though I could clearly see TikTok lighting up her screen. Somehow, like clockwork, all eyes shifted to me. Ryan, you can handle dishes, right? Mom said, as if it was already decided. I forced a smile, nodded, and stood. It wasn't worth the fight. I was halfway through rinsing plates when it hit. This sudden, crushing pain in my chest, like someone was pressing down with both hands. I froze, dish still in my grip, the edges of my vision blurring. I tried to breathe, but each inhale felt shallow, weak. My legs buckled, and before I knew it, I was on the floor, gasping. I remember gripping my shirt, fingers digging into the fabric, as panic surged through me. Stop being dramatic, Ryan, Mom said from behind me. Her voice was sharp and irritated, like I'd just spilled a glass of milk instead of collapsing. I heard Derek laugh, anything to get out of dishes. His chuckle cut through the ringing in my ears. The room didn't move. No one rushed to me. No one knelt to check. I was just lying there, clutching my chest, while my family treated it like another one of my supposed antics. Time warped, spiraling into a dizzying vortex of pain and muffled sound. Was it 30 seconds? Was it 3 minutes? I lay on the cold kitchen tile, the scent of roast chicken and spilled gravy thick in the air, a grotesque counterpoint to the iron taste of panic in my mouth. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard my aunt's hesitant voice, a reluctant concession to the unfolding drama, muttering something about calling for help, just in case. The details of those moments are a blur, a chaotic slideshow of faces looking down at me not with concern, but with a mixture of annoyance and morbid curiosity. But then, one face broke through the haze, sharp and professional. The paramedic. He knelt beside me, his movements efficient and calm, a stark contrast to the frantic, performative flutter that had finally taken hold of my family. He didn't ask if I was being dramatic. He pressed 2 fingers to my neck, his eyes focused. He ripped a heart monitor from his bag, and the sterile smell of antiseptic wipes was the first clean thing I had experienced in what felt like an eternity. The slap of the sticky pads on my skin was a jolt of reality. Then, his face went pale. It was a subtle shift, a tightening around the jaw, a flicker of genuine alarm in his eyes that was more validating than 1,000 apologies. He glanced at the frantic, jagged line flashing across the screen. "We need a stretcher now," he barked, his voice urgent, cutting through the chatter. Suddenly, the entire room erupted. The casual cruelty of moments before was replaced by a loud, clumsy panic. Chairs scraped violently against the floor as relatives scrambled to their feet. Voices, once laced with mockery, were now high-pitched with alarm. My mother, who had just accused me of theatrics, was now shouting my name, her voice cracking for the first time. But all I could think, lying there as a team of strangers worked frantically over me, was how they had laughed, how Derek's shoulders had shaken with mirth, how Emily's eyes had rolled in exasperation, how they had looked at my crumpled form on the floor, and their first, unified thought was that I was faking it to get out of doing the dishes. That was the moment something inside me didn't just shift. It shattered and reformed into something harder, something colder. The fear for my failing body was eclipsed by the cold, diamond-hard realization that my family would never see me. They would never see past the caricature they had created, the soft one, the dramatic one, the convenient family scapegoat. They wouldn't see me, even if it killed me. I didn't say a word as they lifted me onto the stretcher. The world was a dizzying panorama of worried faces, but their worry felt hollow, a performance for the benefit of the paramedics. I didn't look at my mom, whose tears now seemed like a final, desperate act in a play I was no longer a part of. I didn't look at Derek or Emily, whose shock was a mask for their own discomfort. I just let them watch as I was wheeled out of the house, their panicked voices echoing behind me, a familiar, grating soundtrack I'd heard too many times before. That night, in the sterile silence of a hospital bed, punctuated only by the steady beep of the monitor charting the rhythm of my betrayed heart, I made myself a promise. The wires taped to my chest were a physical manifestation of the invisible threads they had used to control me for years. The thin hospital gown felt like the first piece of armor I had ever worn. I replayed the scene over and over. The fall, the pain, the laughter. It wasn't just about that one night. It was about every dismissed hobby, every sensitive label, every time I was made to feel like a burden for having feelings. They thought I was too delicate, too dramatic, too much. Fine. Let them think that. I would play along. I would be the quiet, unassuming Ryan they always expected. But I would not forget. I would remember the echo of their laughter as I lay on the floor, fighting to breathe. I would remember the hollowness of their concern when outsiders were watching. And one day, when the moment came, when the foundations of their perfect, curated world began to crack, I would make sure they understood exactly what it felt like to be dismissed, to be invisible. And I wouldn't have to raise my voice to do it. The power wouldn't be in a grand explosion. It would be in the quiet, inexorable shift of the ground beneath their feet. That night, surrounded by the cold, impartial machinery of medicine, my revenge was born. That was just the beginning. When I got out of the hospital a few days later, I thought, maybe foolishly, that things would change. It was a fragile, flickering hope, the kind you shelter with cupped hands against a harsh wind. That nearly passing out in their kitchen, having a paramedic pale at the sight of my heart rate, and getting wheeled out with an oxygen mask might jolt them into treating me like a human being instead of a joke. For a brief moment, as I waited in the sterile, antiseptic-smelling discharge lounge, I actually let myself believe it. Maybe this was the wake-up call they needed. When Mom came to pick me up, she wore that look she always reserved for church funerals, somber but oddly performative, her face a carefully constructed mask of concern. It was a look designed for an audience, to show everyone what a caring mother she was. The act lasted precisely until the car doors clicked shut. In the privacy of the vehicle, the mask slipped. "Ryan, you scared everyone half to death," she said, not with relief, but with a sigh that felt heavy with inconvenience. as if my medical emergency had been a poorly timed interruption to her Sunday. You can't do that at family gatherings. People thought you were. Well, being dramatic again. I stared out the window, watching the world blur past, the plastic hospital wristband a tight, chafing reminder on my arm. The words felt like a slap. Mom, I wasn't faking. They told me my heart rate dropped dangerously low. The doctor literally said it was serious. She waved a dismissive hand, a gesture I knew all too well. I know, but you have to understand how it looked. You've always been so sensitive. Sensitive. That word again. Their catch-all term for anything about me they didn't understand or approve of. It was the label they slapped on my love for art, my quiet nature, my need for space. Now, it was being used to describe a life-threatening medical event. Collapsing on the floor, gasping for air, was apparently the same as getting misty-eyed at a sad movie. I didn't argue. I'd learned long ago that pushing back just made her dig in deeper, her justifications becoming more elaborate, her voice taking on a wounded tone that somehow always painted me as the aggressor. So I stayed silent, but a knot formed in my chest, tighter and more painful than the hospital monitor's cuff had been. When I walked back into that house a week later for Sunday dinner, the illusion of change shattered completely. The air was thick with the same forced joviality. Plates were piled high with food I had no appetite for. Derek was holding court, boasting about some promotion at work, a promotion at the construction company owned by his dad's friend, where he had managed to fail upward his entire career. Emily was flaunting her acceptance into another graduate program, another expensive endeavor the family would rally to support without question. Mom beamed at both of them, her pride as radiant as if they were Olympic athletes bringing home gold medals. Then, her gaze fell on me, and the warmth vanished. Ryan, you're feeling better now, right? You can help clear the table tonight. I hadn't even touched my food yet. My chest still ached with a dull, persistent throb, and the doctor's explicit instruction to take it easy echoed in my head. But here was Mom, sliding right back into the same role for me. There was no, "We're glad you're okay." Just the unspoken expectation that I would resume my duties, scrubbing the plates of those who had watched me nearly die. Derek, catching my hesitation, smirked from across the table. "Don't collapse this time, cousin. We don't need another show." A ripple of laughter traveled around the table, a cruel, familiar sound. Even my aunt, the one who'd suggested calling for help, chuckled softly behind her napkin. I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth, a hot flush of shame and rage crawling up my neck. They were laughing about me lying on the floor, my chest clenched in agony, barely able to breathe. My hand trembled so much I had to set the fork down with a quiet clink. Emily, ever the golden child, shook her head at Derek in mock disapproval, but then turned her patronizing gaze on me. "Honestly, Ryan, you need to take better care of yourself. You stress too much over small things. That's why your body reacts like that. You just need to relax. Relax." Her words hung in the air, a testament to their complete and utter disconnect from my reality, as if a near-fatal heart episode was something I could simply meditate my way out of. That dinner set the tone for the months that followed. My collapse wasn't a warning sign to them. It was a new piece of ammunition. I became the family's cautionary tale, a story told not with sympathy, but with biting sarcasm. Every time I paused to catch my breath carrying something heavy, Derek would quip, "Careful, don't want a repeat of last time." Every time I excused myself from a late-night board game because I needed rest, Mom would mutter, always finding a way out. Emily once even patted my shoulder like I was a child and said, "Maybe if you worked out more, you wouldn't scare us all like that." The worst part wasn't just the jokes. It was the way they cemented me in the same old role, the helper, the cleaner, the background character in their self-important drama. My purpose, in their eyes, was to serve their needs and absorb their ridicule. The fragile one, the dramatic one, the burden. They had their story, and they were sticking to it. Every time I paused to catch my breath carrying something heavy, Derek would say, "Careful, don't want a repeat of last time." Every time I excused myself from a late-night board game because I needed rest, Mom would mutter, always finding a way out. Emily once even patted my shoulder like I was a child and said, "Maybe if you worked out more, you wouldn't scare us all like that." The worst part wasn't just the jokes. It was the way they stuck me in the same old role, the helper, the cleaner, the background character in their drama. Mom would call me odd hours, asking if I could mow her lawn because Derek was busy with his career. She asked me to drive Emily to campus one morning because her car wasn't running right, even though I had to be late to my own job to do it. When I finally refused one of these favors, saying no to shoveling the driveway after a snowstorm because my doctor had literally told me not to strain myself, Mom gave me this look of pure disappointment. Ryan, you know we can't rely on anyone else. Derek's schedule is packed. Emily's got so much studying. You're the only one I can count on. Count on. Funny choice of words. It didn't mean trust or value. It meant expendable. I'd come home after these dinners, seething quietly, sitting in my dim apartment with takeout cartons, replaying every word in my head. I wanted to shout at them, to throw all the hospital reports in their faces, to make them see. But deep down, I already knew they never would. Not because they couldn't, but because they didn't want to. They liked the narrative too much. Ryan the fragile one. Ryan the burden. Ryan the servant. One evening, scrolling through Instagram, a familiar scene of forced familial bliss stopped my thumb. It was a photo from a family barbecue I hadn't even been invited to. In the center was Derek, my cousin, grinning with a beer in hand. To his right, my sister Emily, mid-laugh, looking perfect as always. And in the background, holding up a glass of wine and a toast, was my mom. The caption, posted by Derek, read, "Best family ever." My chest, which had been prone to a nervous tightness for years, burned with a cold fire that had nothing to do with my health. They had literally, pointedly, left me out. After everything I did for them, every slight I had swallowed, they didn't even bother to hide their exclusion. When I finally gathered the courage to confront Mom about it, gently, over the phone, her response was a masterclass in passive aggression. "Oh, honey," she'd sighed, her voice dripping with manufactured concern. "We didn't think you'd want to come. All that noise, the activity. We were just thinking of your health." But I knew the truth. It wasn't about protecting me. It was about convenience. I wasn't part of their perfect picture, and it was simply easier to crop me out. This wasn't a one-time occurrence. It was a pattern, the foundation of our relationship stories. The favoritism was a gaping wound that never healed. When Derek mentioned needing help with a down payment on a flashy new truck, Mom immediately offered a loan, no questions asked. When Emily announced she wanted to study abroad for a semester, the entire family rallied, a flurry of financial support to cover her travel expenses. Yet, when I quietly mentioned my own medical bills were piling up after my health scare, I was met with a deafening silence. Then Mom's voice, sharp and curt. "Ryan, you've got to learn to be independent." The message was crystal clear. Their successes and desires were family responsibilities. My struggles were personal failings. Despite this, I was still their go-to for grunt work. I was the unpaid chauffeur for Emily, the last-minute errand boy for Mom's groceries, the free labor for assembling Derek's new furniture. If I ever dared to say no, the guilt-tripping was immediate and suffocating. "I guess you just don't care about family," Mom would say, her voice a weapon. "Your sister never complains," or "your cousin does so much for us." Lies, all of it. But something began to shift within me. While the resentment grew, so did a kind of quiet clarity. Each sarcastic jab, each act of manipulation, each casual dismissal was like another brick stacked on a wall inside me. At first, that wall just made me feel trapped, a prisoner in my own family. But after a while, I realized it was also building something sturdy, a foundation I could stand on. The more they underestimated me, the more space they inadvertently gave me to think, to plan, to imagine a future where their laughter wasn't the soundtrack to my pain, where their favoritism didn't dictate my worth. And though they were oblivious, wrapped up in their own self-importance, the cracks in their perfect facade were starting to show. Derek's promotion wasn't as stable as he'd boasted. Emily's endless schooling was draining their resources. Mom's sighs on the phone grew heavier, her words sharper, her carefully constructed controls stretched thin. I didn't act yet. I wasn't ready. But in the lonely quiet of my apartment, my abandoned sketchbook on the floor, I began to take mental notes. Piece by piece, I assembled the puzzle of their lives, their finances, their dependencies. And as broken as I felt, as low as I'd sunk, one truth grew clearer every day. They had handed me all the ammunition I would ever need. All I had to do was wait. And waiting was something I had learned to do very, very well. When you've been pushed to the bottom for so long, there comes a point where you either stay there and let the weight crush you, or you start digging your way out with whatever scraps of strength you have left. For me, the digging began with silence. Not the pained silence of hurt, but a chosen silence. I stopped answering their calls. I stopped looking at their posts. I stopped giving them space in my head. At first, it felt like cutting off my own oxygen, the instinct to please so deeply ingrained. But slowly, like unclenching a fist I didn't know I'd been holding, I realized I was breathing easier without their voices in my ear. Then came routine. I forced myself into new habits. Not grand, life-altering changes, but small, steady ones. Waking up earlier, cooking real meals instead of surviving on takeout, sketching again, even if the drawings were rough and lifeless at first. The spark was gone, but the muscle memory remained. I bought a cheap keyboard from a classified site. It wasn't the beautiful, heavy-keyed upright piano of my childhood, the one they'd so casually given away to Emily, but it was mine. Mine alone. Every night after work, I'd sit in my small apartment, fingers pressing out broken melodies. At first, my chest ached more from the memory of what I'd lost than from the music itself. But over time, those notes became something else. A reminder that I still had a voice, even if no one in my family cared to hear it. The real turning point, the first Ida update in my internal Reddit story, came from the one place I least expected it. Work. My manager, the same man who'd seen the exhaustion in my eyes months earlier, called me into his office. "Ryan," he said, tapping a pen against a folder, "you've been putting in extra hours. I know things haven't been easy for you personally, but the truth is, you're good at this job. Really good. I want to move you into a lead position." I blinked, half convinced I'd misheard. A lead position? Me? The forgotten one, the family joke? I'd spent so long as a background character that being seen, being recognized for merit, felt alien. But it was real. The promotion came with a raise. It wasn't massive, but it was enough. Enough to pay my bills without that familiar knot of dread in my stomach. Enough to breathe. With that newfound stability, I made choices for myself. I didn't buy flashy clothes or new gadgets to mimic their lifestyle. I saved. I invested. I upgraded my cheap keyboard to a professional-grade digital piano with fully weighted keys that felt like coming home. I enrolled in an online course for music composition, something I'd always dreamed of but never believed I deserved. And slowly, everything began to come back to life. My sketches regained their depth, lines becoming sure, shading more confident. Stories formed in every stroke. I started to build a new life, brick by brick. My coworkers, seeing this change, invited me out. Trivia nights, after-work drinks, casual hangouts. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't used to being wanted, to being included without an ulterior motive. But I went, and to my astonishment, people laughed at my jokes. They listened when I spoke. They treated me like I belonged. It was an addictive feeling, not because I craved validation, but because it was the first time I realized I wasn't the problem. I wasn't broken or fragile. I had just been trapped in a family that needed me to be. Outside of their script, I was free. I could be someone real. This quiet confidence was the beginning of my true revenge. Months passed, and my apartment transformed. The cheap couch was replaced with a sturdy, secondhand one I refinished myself. My sketches lined the walls in simple frames, each one a reminder of the voice I'd reclaimed. The digital piano sat near the window, sunlight spilling across the keys in the morning. I started recording little pieces, nothing fancy, just melodies layered over one another. A friend from work heard one and said, "You should put this online." So I did. Tentatively at first, uploading to a small platform under a pseudonym. No fanfare, no announcement, just music into the void. To my shock, people listened. A handful at first, then more. Comments trickled in. "Beautiful. This touched me. Please make more." For the first time, strangers valued the thing my family had dismissed as useless. That was the beginning of power. Not power over others, but power over myself. The realization that I didn't need their validation, that I could build something that belonged entirely to me. Meanwhile, my family still lived in their bubble, blind to my growth. Mom occasionally left voicemails dripping with passive aggressiveness. "Ryan, it's been weeks." Family doesn't turn their back on each other. Derek posted about his new truck. Careful scrolling revealed the cracks. Complaints about payments, stress about hours. Emily flaunted her piano on social media. Her captions, increasingly desperate for attention. Day 40, still learning, so hard, but I'll get there. Her videos showed her stumbling through scales, every note stiff and forced. The likes and comments dwindled. I didn't comment. I didn't reach out. I watched quietly, and each post, each message, reinforced the same truth. While they were stuck in their cycle, I was rising. The real test came when I bumped into Derek at a cafe one morning. He looked frayed. The swagger was still there, but it was thinner, stretched over something anxious. We exchanged awkward small talk, and then he dropped it casually, like it was nothing. Hey man, you doing better now? Good, good. Listen, you think you could float me a little cash? Just a temporary thing. Truck payments are killing me. The old Ryan would have folded instantly, reaching for his wallet to prove he wasn't selfish. But I just smiled, sipped my coffee, and said, sorry, can't help you. His face flickered, shock, then annoyance, but he didn't push. He just muttered something and walked away. I sat there afterward, my heart steady, my chest calm. I realized that was power too, saying no, refusing to be their safety net. Weeks later, a call came that I almost ignored. The name on the screen was Emily. For a moment, the old Pavlovian dread tightened in my stomach. A call from Emily usually meant she needed something, a favor wrapped in a condescending package, a task she deemed beneath her. I had been systematically ignoring their calls, letting them pile up in my voicemail like unread junk mail. But this time, curiosity, a cold and detached sort of curiosity, got the better of me. I answered. Ryan. Her voice was an oil slick of manufactured sweetness, a tone she reserved for when she wanted to appear magnanimous. I was just thinking about you. How are you feeling? Really? The question was a performance. She didn't care how I was feeling. She cared about the optics of asking. I'm fine, Emily, I said, my voice flat, devoid of the emotion she was likely hoping to provoke. Oh, good, good, she chirped, a little too quickly. Listen, I was thinking, since you're the musical one in the family, you should come over sometime. I've been practicing on the piano, and I'd love your opinion. You could give me some tips. It'll be fun. I almost laughed. A dry, humorless sound caught in my throat. Fun. She wanted me to come to the home I was no longer welcome in, to sit before the instrument that had been my only solace, a piece of my soul they had casually ripped out and handed to her like a birthday trinket, and offer her tips. She wanted me to validate her clumsy attempts at a passion she had only ever feigned interest in when it suited her. She wanted me to applaud her playing scales on the keys that held the memory of my own childhood melodies, the ones they had all ignored. It was a power play, a subtle way of reminding me of what she had and what I had lost. The old me would have caved. The old me, desperate for any scrap of inclusion, would have seen this as an olive branch, however thorny, and grasped it. But the old me was buried under a pile of medical bills and broken promises. I'm busy, Emily, I said. The words were simple, but they felt like a tectonic shift. There was a pause on the other end, a flicker of confusion. Oh, well, when are you free? I'm not sure. I'm focusing on my own projects right now. Maybe another time. Well, let me know, she said, her voice losing its sugary coating, replaced by a brittle edge. The mask had slipped. She wasn't used to being turned down, especially by me. I hung up the phone and felt, for the first time in a long time, a sense of quiet triumph. I walked over to my own digital piano, the one I had bought with my own hard-earned money. I sat down, my fingers finding the weighted keys, and began to play. The music that flowed from my hands wasn't the tentative, broken melodies of a few months ago. It was complex, layered, a tapestry of my quiet rage and newfound hope. It was a song of resilience, a song that was entirely my own. My music flowed smoother than hers ever would, not because I was inherently better, but because it mattered to me. It lived in me, and they couldn't take that away anymore. That small act of defiance was a catalyst. My success, both personal and professional, began to grow slowly but steadily. At work, my promotion wasn't a fluke. I took to the new responsibilities with a quiet determination my family had never seen. I managed small projects, coordinated with clients, and even got sent to a regional conference. Standing there in a suit I had bought myself, a crisp, well-fitting suit that made me feel like an adult and not a boy playing dress-up. I talked to professionals who listened to my ideas, who respected my input. I realized how far I'd come from the version of myself who once mowed mom's lawn while Derek slept in. The confidence I gained at work began to bleed into other areas of my life. My music, which I had tentatively posted online, started to gain traction. A small YouTube creator, one who made atmospheric animated videos, reached out. "Your composition is beautiful," the email read. "It's exactly the mood I'm looking for. Would you be willing to let me use it? I can offer a small licensing fee." A fee. Someone wanted to pay me for my art. The money wasn't huge, but it was more than I'd ever earned from my art before. I looked at my bank account that week and felt a strange, unfamiliar feeling. Not dread, but a flicker of pride. The video went live, and overnight, my track doubled in streams. Then another podcaster reached out, and another. My little hobby, the thing my family had dismissed as just a hobby, was becoming a small but steady side income. With this newfound confidence, I began to test the boundaries with my family. The calls still came, laced with demands disguised as requests. But now, when Mom called asking me to help Derek move furniture on my one day off, I said, "Sorry, Mom, I have plans." The silence that followed was thick with her disapproval, but I didn't fill it with apologies. When Emily sent me a video of her fumbling through a simple piece, asking for feedback, I replied with a simple, "Sounds like you're working hard." No praise, no criticism, just a polite, distant acknowledgement. Each refusal was met with a fresh wave of guilt tripping. But it was different now. They were too distracted by their own slowly crumbling worlds to press too hard. Derek's bravado on social media was a thin veneer over a growing panic. I saw the late-night rants about his ungrateful boss, the vague complaints about money. Emily's sophisticated life was a carefully curated illusion of staged photos in borrowed spaces, her captions increasingly desperate for engagement. And that's when I saw it. The balance was shifting. For years, I'd been their fallback, their scapegoat, the one they could rely on to clean up their messes. But now, my absence was creating a vacuum, and the cracks in their perfect facade were widening. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place at work, of all places. A colleague I'd grown close to, a kind woman named Sarah, mentioned she and her husband were buying their first home. "It's terrifying," she laughed over coffee, "but so exciting. You should look into real estate, Ryan. Even if it's just small investments, you'd be good at it. You're meticulous, and you've got savings now." The idea lodged itself in my brain and wouldn't let go. Real estate, property, ownership. For so long, my life had been about surviving, about keeping my head down. But what if I could build something bigger? Something that gave me leverage, stability, and a kind of power my family could never take from me. So I started studying. Quietly, late at night. After my long shifts and my precious hours of piano practice, I devoured books, took online courses, and even attended a few local seminars on property investment. I learned about foreclosures, about tax liens, about how to spot opportunities where others saw dead ends. The more I read, the more the dots connected. And then, I circled back to Mom's house. That overdue tax notice I'd found in the public records. The high mortgage balance. The truth hit me with the force of a physical blow. The fortress wasn't as solid as everyone believed. It was vulnerable. It was tied to numbers in a bank ledger and deadlines that didn't care about family pride. I didn't act immediately. I knew better than that. Knowledge is power, and I had both time and patience on my side. I imagined the day they'd realize the roles had reversed, the day they'd come to me, not with jokes or dismissals, but with need. And I wouldn't have to shout or gloat. I'd simply decide whether or not to extend my hand. For now, though, I stayed silent. I built my life, brick by brick. I saved every extra dollar, invested carefully, and watched my music project blossom. Each step forward was like placing another brick under my feet, raising me higher while they stayed stuck in the quicksand of their choices. And as the months passed, I stopped feeling like the fragile one entirely. Because here's the truth no one tells you. The longer people underestimate you, the more powerful you become when you finally rise. They don't see you coming. They don't prepare for it. They hand you every opportunity by assuming you're too weak to take it. And my family? They'd spent a lifetime underestimating me, which meant that by the time they realized what I was capable of, it would already be too late. Revenge isn't about yelling. It isn't about slamming fists or grand explosions. That's what my family never understood. They always thought of me as dramatic because their idea of strength was noise. The loudest laugh, the sharpest jab, the biggest display. But real strength, real revenge, is quiet. It's calculated. It's the moment they realize they've been playing checkers while you've been playing chess. By the time the opportunity came, I was ready. I'd been watching, waiting, and building for over a year. My savings had grown, my side income from music had doubled, and my position at work had become stable enough that I wasn't terrified of missing a paycheck. I wasn't rich, not yet, but I was steady. And steady is a dangerous thing to someone whose life is built on appearances. The cracks in my family's fortress had widened into gaping holes. Derek's truck payments had caught up to him. He was skipping events because he was working late, though everyone knew it was to cover bills. Emily had abandoned her grand piano project, quietly shifting it out of frame in her photos as her social media presence became a desperate plea for attention. And Mom's voice, in the rare calls she still made, grew tighter with every passing week. One evening, she let it slip, her voice a strained whisper. The mortgage company is calling again. They're relentless. That's when the plan began to crystallize. I kept my distance, of course. I didn't want them suspecting anything. But I dug deeper into the property records, into tax filings, into the county's public notices. And there it was, clear as day, a notice of pre-foreclosure. Mom had fallen behind further than she'd admitted. The house, the very stage for my lifelong humiliation, the crown jewel they'd guarded so fiercely, was slipping from their grasp. This wasn't just a house. It was the physical manifestation of their power over me, and its foundation was crumbling. The irony was so thick I could taste it, bitter and sweet. They'd mocked me for being fragile, dramatic, useless. But while they were busy curating their perfect lives for social media and laughing at my expense, I had been quietly, meticulously learning, saving, and positioning myself. Now, the balance of power, the very dynamic our family had been built on for decades, was about to flip in the most poetic way imaginable. My plan wasn't born of a single fiery moment of rage, but forged in the cold, quiet nights of my lonely apartment. It began with the information I'd gathered, those little cracks in their facade. Derek's financial woes, Emily's performative struggles, and my mother's mounting stress. The pre-foreclosure notice was the key. I reached out to a real estate contact I'd made through one of the financial seminars I'd been attending. Another quiet step in my self-improvement they knew nothing about. We met at a small, anonymous coffee shop. I was in a pressed shirt, feeling more like myself than I ever had in their presence. He, a man named Mr. Harrison, was all business, flipping through a folder of papers. "You're serious about this, son?" he asked, his eyes sharp over his reading glasses as he slid the documents across the table. They detailed the outstanding mortgage, the overdue property taxes, the auction date. It was all there in black and white. "Dead serious," I said, my hand surprisingly steady as I picked up the pen and signed the initial paperwork, securing my position as an anonymous bidder. The process, as he'd warned, wasn't fast. Banks, with their labyrinthine bureaucracy, never are. But I was patient. I had learned patience through years of enduring their taunts, of waiting for a scrap of kindness that never came. As the auction date approached, my heart pounded a nervous rhythm against my ribs, a stark contrast to the terrifying silence it had held on their kitchen floor. When the day came, I didn't attend in person. I bid through my contact, a ghost in their financial machine. I watched the online portal as other bids came in. Each one made my stomach clench. But I had done the math. I knew my limits. I knew the house at true market value, and more importantly, I knew its emotional history. My history. When the gavel icon finally struck on the screen, a small, digital sound that felt like a cannon blast in my quiet apartment. The property was mine. Sold. The screen read, next to a bid amount that represented every extra shift, every skipped luxury, every quiet moment I had invested in myself. Just like that. The house my family had ruled over, the house where I'd been the servant, the weak one, the punchline, now belonged to me. I didn't rush to tell them. That would have ruined the exquisite, slow-burning beauty of it. Instead, I waited for the official channels, the cold, impersonal hand of the law, to deliver the news. I waited for them to come to me. And sure enough, it didn't take long. A week later, my phone, which had been blissfully silent from their end for months, lit up with Mom's name. I let it go to voicemail. Then another call, and another. A frantic barrage of texts followed. Finally, I answered, letting the silence hang for a moment before speaking. Hello? My voice was calm, a placid lake over a churning sea. Ryan, you need to listen, she said, her tone frantic, stripped of all its usual condescending authority. It was a voice I'd never heard before. The bank. They've made a mistake. They're saying the house is sold. We don't know what to do. I let a deliberate pause stretch, long enough for her panic to echo in my ears. No mistake, Mom, I said evenly. I bought it. The silence on the other end was thick, suffocating. I imagined her face, the slow motion crumble of disbelief. You what? I own the house now, I repeated, my voice not wavering. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I just stated the fact, as simply as stating the weather. Finally, she snapped. Ryan, this isn't funny. It's not a joke. No, I said softly, the words a quiet dagger. It's not. The deed has my name on it. For years, they had laughed at me for collapsing. They had laughed at me for being dramatic. They had laughed at me for holding on to things that mattered. Now, there was no laughter, only a stunned, gaping silence. Word spread through the family like wildfire. Derek called next, his usual bravado curdled into aggression. Man, you can't just take the house. That's Mom's. That's the family's. No, I said calmly. It was the bank's. And now it's mine. You don't even need it. He exploded, his voice cracking. You live in some tiny apartment. You're barely there. I needed it enough. I cut in, the line going silent. Then came Emily, her approach dripping with the faux sweetness she always used for manipulation. Ryan, her text began, long and rambling. I've been thinking a lot about how I treated you, about the piano. I see now I shouldn't have taken it. I was just so excited. But you have to admit, this is going too far. We're family. Holidays won't be the same without the house. That line almost made me laugh out loud. Holidays. The same holidays they'd excluded me from, or mocked me through, or used me as free labor for cleanup while they celebrated. Now, suddenly, the sanctity of family holidays mattered. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. The calls and texts didn't just come from them. Weeks turned into a month, and as their panic sharpened, the extended family began to mobilize. I started hearing from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. A cousin I barely knew texted me, saying Mom was devastated, Emily was barely keeping it together, and Derek was not himself. One aunt, my mother's sister, even tried guilt-tripping me about legacy. Your grandparents would be so disappointed to see you acting like this, Ryan, tearing the family apart. Legacy. A funny word, I thought. If their legacy was a cycle of humiliation and casual cruelty, then maybe it was time for that cycle to end for good. The breaking point came one rainy afternoon, a knock on my apartment door. I opened it to find my mother standing there, soaked, clutching a flimsy umbrella that was doing little to shield her from the downpour. For the first time in my life, she looked small. Not the towering matriarch who ran our household like a general, but a tired, scared woman who had finally, completely lost control. Ryan, she said, her voice trembling as I let her in. She dripped water onto my clean floor, sitting on the very edge of the couch I had so carefully refinished. We need to talk. You can't take the house from us, she said softly, her eyes pleading. That house is everything. It's our memories, our history. Without it, we have nothing. I leaned against the wall, my arms crossed, watching her. You mean without it, you have nothing, I corrected gently. Her eyes flashed with a spark of the old anger, but it was quickly extinguished by desperation. She didn't deny it. Instead, she tried another angle, the one she always fell back on. We were hard on you, I know that. But we love you, Ryan. We always have. You're just sensitive. We didn't know how to handle you. I almost laughed. The sheer audacity. Sensitive. The same word she'd used as a weapon to dismiss my pain for years, now wrapped in the tatters of a fake apology. I shook my head slowly, a cold finality settling in my chest. You laughed when I collapsed on your floor, Mom. You gave away the one thing that mattered to me. You told me to stop being dramatic when I could barely breathe. That's not love. That's cruelty. She flinched as if struck. She couldn't argue because it was the unvarnished truth. The silence stretched between us, heavy and sharp. Finally, she whispered, her voice barely audible. So what happens now? That was the moment. The full 360-degree rotation of power. For my entire life, I was the one asking that question, filled with dread. What happens now, after every insult, every dismissal, every casual betrayal? But now, the question was hers to ask, and the answer was mine to give. I'm selling the house, I said evenly. Her face crumpled. Ryan, please. No. I cut her off, my voice steady, devoid of the emotion she so desperately wanted to see. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for me. That house was never a home for me. It was a cage, and selling it is the only way to let it go. She stared at me, her eyes wet with tears that, for once, didn't move me. And for the first time, I saw true recognition in her expression, not of my pain, but of her loss. She had lost me, irrevocably, for good. The sale went through 2 months later. A young, bright-eyed couple bought it, their laughter echoing in the empty rooms as they planned where to put a nursery. I handed them the keys with a steady hand, watching as they smiled, imagining a future full of love and warmth in walls that had once held nothing but pain and shadows for me. For them, it was a beginning. For me, it was an ending. The fallout was swift and satisfyingly quiet. Mom had to move into a small, drab rental apartment across town, her kingdom reduced to 2 rooms and a kitchenette. Derek, without the financial safety net he'd always taken for granted, ended up selling his precious truck at a loss to cover his mounting debts. His bravado was shattered. Emily, the golden child, bounced between friends' couches, her sophisticated life crumbling into a string of increasingly pathetic, staged photos in borrowed spaces. They called less and less, first out of anger, then out of bruised pride, and finally, out of resignation. One by one, the chorus of voices that had once crowded my head with their judgments and demands went quiet, and in that quiet, I finally found peace. I filled my new, larger apartment with music. My online compositions grew, my following blossomed, and one day, a small independent label reached out with a recording offer. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving, on my terms. Sometimes, late at night, I'd think about the boy I used to be, the quiet, sensitive boy who'd sat at that old upright piano, fingers trembling, just hoping for a scrap of approval, a moment of kindness. I wished I could go back and tell him that one day he'd own the very keys they tried to take from him. That he'd rise, not with noise and fury, but with a quiet, unshakable strength they couldn't touch. The last time I saw Mom was months after the sale. I was at that same coffee shop, and she was there, looking older and more tired than I'd ever seen her. She approached my table, a ghost from a past life. "Ryan," she whispered, "why did you do it? Why didn't you give us another chance?" I set down my coffee, looked her directly in the eye, and felt a profound sense of calm. The rage was gone, replaced by a simple, unshakable truth. Because you never gave me one. And with that, I stood, walked out into the warm sunlight, and left her behind, for good this time. I didn't look back. I had a new song to write,